Welcome to you all. I'm delighted to open this session, the second session of the Jews in the Christian in the city, and we have only three lecturers with us. As in the session before, we are going to take the question and answers after the lectures, and I am very pleased to ask Dr. Cordelia S. from the University of Gothenburg to give a lecture. She studies from Hamburg University in History, Theology, and Scandinavian languages. She had a postdoc in Stockholm University, and she is a fellow at the Waldmann University, Tel Aviv, and the Zentrum for Anti-Semitism in Berlin. And she is interested in a lot of subjects, mainly and concerned to the topics of this conference: Jewish-Christian relations and anti-Semitism, and the late medieval-urban conflicts. Her most recent publication, very interesting one, about Jews and Muslims in medieval Scandinavia and the Baltic region, which is a fascinating subject, and I think a title for another conference.
It used to be a conference.
Jews, Muslims, and in the medieval Scandinavia. Okay. And she's going to talk about non-Jews in the city, a reassessment of Jewish life in the Prussian and Hanseatic towns.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then the presentation. How do I get to? How do I get to the images? So I want to here. Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much for the introduction, and especially thank all of the organizers for the kind invitation here. I realize, as in actually many conferences, I'm also here a bit of a strange bird. I don't come from Jewish studies, but from general medieval history. And my interest in this topic comes from my investigations of the medieval area of the Teutonic Order, which is Prussia. And what I'm interested in is, so to say, the cultural contexts and also religious and ethnic contexts in areas which used to be described as very homogeneous. And so I'm trying to detect the breaking points of this. And one part of this is like in medieval Prussia, there's this master narrative of German Drang nach Osten and German colonization and the Germans bringing the culture to the east. And there's actually a smaller master narrative regarding Jews in this. And this is what I'm interested in and what I'm going to talk about today. I guess medieval Prussia is pretty far away for most of you, so I brought you a map. What the area we're actually talking about is this here. This is the Prussian heartlands during the 14th and 15th century, under the rule of the Teutonic Order proper. Then Livonia under the rule of the Livonian Order, which is kind of a branch. And so this is the biggest stretch that the territory of the Teutonic Order ever had. They also acquired this part here, Neumark, Novamarkia. And as we see, the neighbors of this are here the Polish crown and the Lithuanian Grand Duchy. And as most of you know, there are considerable, large and stable and old Jewish communities in the neighboring areas. So, what about Prussia? I start with a common scholarly opinion on the Prussian towns, which is this one. Kurt Forstreuter was an archivist and historian in Königsberg and after the war in Göttingen. And he was the only one who actually wrote a longer article looking for the sources for Prussian Jews, medieval Prussian Jews. And his verdict was that, I quote, "For the Eastern European Jewry, Prussia was, thanks to the policy of the Teutonic Order, not a gateway, but a bulwark restricting their influx." So what he's right in is that we do not have any written or archaeological sources confirming stable Jewish communities in this area. But this idea that he presents of an active anti-Jewish policy is actually quite politically contested. You can see he uses the rhetoric of a bulwark and an influx and waves that are coming and that have to be pushed back. And also Kurt Forstreuter was a Nazi himself. As an archivist, he was traveling around in the occupied territories, stealing the Jewish community archives during the war. So probably not the most reliable person to give an opinion on this. So my question here is not so much were there any Jews in this area, but how does it come that this was possible to maintain as such a non-topic, and especially why this idea of an anti-Jewish policy within the framework of the master narrative German Drang nach Osten? So regarding Jewish life in this area, we have much less to go after than in the southern and western parts of the empire, both in terms of size of the Jewish communities, but also regarding sources of the urban administration in general. One of the reasons everybody writes about Prussia during the 15th century is not that the 15th century was most interesting, but this is when they start producing sources, not really before. Hanseatic towns as the most likely places where Jews would have been either traveling through or then also settling within the Prussian realm. And from the middle of the 14th century on, these are the towns in Prussia that are present at the Diets of the Hanseatic League, and thus can be counted as Hanseatic cities. Danzig is the biggest one, and Elbing and Thorn, and the other ones are said to be the small towns. I made you a map here where they are placed. The small red dots are the Hanseatic towns. Regarding sources, I'm super jealous of the Regensburg people, as I already said, because the sources of the town administrations are pretty scarce. Elbing is a bit better, where Liber Civitatis is preserved from 1330, but in the rest of the towns, it really only starts towards the end of the 14th century. And at the same time, the administration of the Teutonic Order as the landlord of these towns kicks in, and that is mainly, it's also diplomatic sources, but it's mainly tax lists and tax registers. And what happens then in the 15th century, after 1410, when the Teutonic Order suffers a severe loss in the Battle of Tannenberg-Grunwald against the Polish-Lithuanian Union, that the Prussian estates, or the towns and the nobility, organized themselves against the Teutonic Order. And it's in this phase of urban self-consciousness and growing organization that we find more and more sources about different ethnicities, religion, different groups of people within the Prussian towns. And what is also interesting and also difficult in order to assess, for example, Jewish communities in the towns in this phase is that because there were so many wars between the rest of the Prussian Teutonic Order realm and Poland and Lithuania, is that the autonomy of the towns shifted, and they sometimes took the Teutonic Order as their landlord when the order was on the winning side, and sometimes they shifted to the Polish king. And these two institutions, the Teutonic Order and the Polish king, had very different general policies. As you all probably know, the Polish crown had an extremely tolerant policy towards Jews and Jewish settlements, and was very favorable of them. But also regarding the Prussian towns, it was very keen on giving autonomy to the town and self-administration and a lot of privileges. The Teutonic Order, on the other side, was always very repressive towards the autonomy of the towns. But was it also repressive towards the Jews? Not so sure. So let's have a short look at the probability of a general ban on anti-Jewish settlement under the Teutonic Order before I turn to actual Jewish settlement in the towns. There's only one source stating that the Teutonic Order forbid Jewish settlement in its area. This is a so-called Landordnung, a constitutional law by Siegfried von Feuchtwangen. He was the High Master who moved the main seat of the Teutonic Order from Venice to Prussia in 1309. But we do not have this source. It is only preserved in a highly unreliable chronicle from 200 years after. So this is basically what the entire scholarly opinion of a ban against Jewish settlement is based upon. Even if we state that this Landordnung has existed and was lost in between and was taken up in the historiographic tradition, then all the chronicles which use it are extremely contradictory. Also, if we look at the pure text, if we think that this text really has existed in 1309, the ban is not directed really against Jewish settlement, but against religious heterodoxy in general, against pagan priests, and mainly against vagrants. It really speaks of pagan priests wandering around and sorcerers, and mentions Jews, so to say, en passant. So it is not an explicit ban, not like the non tolerandis iudeis privileges that the Polish towns get later. Anyways, since the Prussian towns, and especially the Hanseatic towns, kept getting their own privileges, this ban, even if it had ever existed, was probably not even relevant for the Prussian towns. And next argument, even if this ban ever has existed, latest during the 15th century we have more and more sources speaking of Jewish merchants and traders in these towns. So even if there had been an actual ban on Jewish settlement, it wasn't very persisting, and it wasn't really pushed through, at least about 100 years after the ban. So if we look at the legal and ideological framework of Jewish settlement in Prussia, it wasn't actually bad at all. There was, according to my scholarly opinion, and I've really looked near and far, there was no active anti-Jewish policy by the Teutonic Order. There were, which is maybe also relevant, no Black Death related pogroms, even though there are sources speaking both of Jews and of the Black Death. But we have no sources confirming that Jews were actually blamed for the Black Death and that there were expulsions and pogroms. Also, the Teutonic Order, for being an ecclesiastical institution, has produced almost no anti-Jewish literature. And also, generally in the literary tradition of the order, Jews are like the in bono Jews of the Old Testament, and contemporary Jews do not really appear. There's nothing about ritual murder. There's really no anti-Jewish hostility to be found in the text produced by the landlord, so to say, at all. But we have, from the urban administration, Jews mentioned especially in legal sources, in books of law, in Schöppensprüche. There are oath formulas, particularly for Jews, things like that keep popping up in the 14th and 15th century. And we have, logically, the very comprehensive trading relations with both Poland and Lithuania. So it seems entirely unlogical that no Jew has ever passed through the country of Prussia. And, as I already mentioned, we have this entire process of the organization of the estates, in which rights and privileges, especially of the towns, are being negotiated back and forth. So this was the territorial law, more or less. So let's have a look at the towns. And I can state that in the very early town privileges from the early 14th century, Jews are never mentioned, not positive and not negative. So a thing that I've been looking into a bit more, and that is also discussed in this article by Kurt Forstreuter that I mentioned in the beginning. He basically says there have never been any Jews in Prussia, but in the 15th century the towns claim more and more anti-Jewish regulation, which is a contradiction in itself. And my idea is that it stems from the idea that both an ecclesiastical institution and the town councils necessarily need to be anti-Jewish. And this is really nothing that can be confirmed in this case. Because if we look at what we have in terms of trading restrictions where Jews are mentioned, then there's this one case from 1435 where it's discussed that maybe Lithuanian, English and Jewish merchants should be a bit restricted. This is a discussion that comes in the pre-negotiations of the Eternal Peace of Brest-Kujawski, and it is never really decided upon. What is decided upon is free trespassing and trading between Prussia and Poland and Lithuania, but Jews are not mentioned particularly in this. 1438, a Prussian Diet discusses again the restriction for Jews and people from Nuremberg, but does again not decide upon it. And then 1455, when the Prussian towns again vow their loyalty to the Polish king, they receive a privilege from the Polish king that Jewish, Nurembergish, Scottish, Flemish, Dutch, Lombards, and a couple of others are not allowed to settle in the town without the agreement of the town council. So in some, these trading restrictions, which are the only ones where Jews actually are mentioned in the entire source material, are on the one hand never decided upon, and on the other hand they are not particularly anti-Jewish, but they are to be seen within the attempt of the Hanseatic town to restrict the settlement of the permanent settlement of foreigners. And the situation can be compared to the English, who settled, for example, in the areas of Danzig and Königsberg, but never received citizenship, even though they have Hanseatic contours and administration within the town, but they never received citizenship. And then after the Reformation, the sources grow a bit more richly. And there it is always stated that we have so many traders here from all kinds of countries and we need to restrict them. So obviously it was impossible to restrict it before. So the legal framework also in the towns is not so bad, but still we have no sources of permanent Jewish settlements or communities in these areas. The only thing that we have, and that is really safe to go after, is sources speaking of conflicts between residents of the Prussian Hanseatic towns and foreign travelers and merchants who come into the town. So I picked here a number of cases which are richly documented through letter exchanges between the Teutonic Order or Teutonic Order officials and officials of the Polish or Lithuanian crown. And so these are cases where it's mentioned that it is a Jew who was robbed. There are also a lot of Christians robbed, but I picked the cases to prove my case that there were obviously Jewish merchants from Poland and Lithuania traveling to the Prussian towns, staying there for a while, trading and so on, and sometimes they were robbed. So we know that they were present there, at least temporarily. And we have a few cases where the presence is manifested in conflicts in the sources, but we can also safely assume, I think, that the rest is a pretty peaceful, cohabiting, dark figure of unreported cases. So if we think about these few reported cases of actual present Jewish merchants, how did they live? Did they find or form an infrastructure of Jewish life? If we assume that they did maintain a kind of Jewish identity and Jewish community life, then we have to assume that there might have been resident Jews with whom these merchants lived and where they found their infrastructure. So what are the potential places of Jewish settlement within the Prussian Hanseatic towns? We know that there were Judengassen in the towns at least of Danzig, Königsberg and Elbing in the middle of the 15th century. This Judengasse is from the medieval town plan of Danzig, so it's pretty central in the old city. What we do not have, as for other better documented towns, is who actually lived there, and not for the other streets either. So, so these are places where it's potentially Jewish people lived, and as has been discussed here before, these streets are entirely integrated into the rest of the cities. There's no sign of a kind of exclusion or conclusion or whatever of these potential Jewish settlements. Another interesting thing that is really badly documented, unfortunately, are the Freiheiten and suburbs around, especially Danzig and Königsberg. These are areas around the Hanseatic towns which do not fall under the rule of the Teutonic Order, but belong to the bishops. And the documentation, again, is pretty bad, but it has always been assumed that Jews and other foreigners were settling in these areas where it was necessary for them, and also not possible for them, to receive citizenship of the towns. And settlement in these areas is basically not documented at all. We can assume that because one of these places is until today called Alt-Schottland, that Scots and English settled there. And also we have some cases where Jews apply to the town councils of Danzig and Königsberg and say, why do I have to stay in the Freiheiten? We want to stay in the town. But this is it becomes a bit more evident after the Reformation only, not in the medieval material. Another place that is very interesting is Thorn. If you remember the map, Thorn is at the very lower end, at the river and also at the border to Poland. And it has kind of a twin town, Nassau, Nowa Nassau, which is being relocated during the 15th century. And Nassau seems to have been a center of Jewish money-lending business, because the communications of the Teutonic Order are full with, let's get some more Jews from get some more money from the Jews in Nassau and so on. So that is also a place where obviously some, I'm done in a minute, some exchange happened. So to conclude, there are two questions, either why no Jews or why no sources. Is the lack of actual Jews a result of a conscious policy? I do not think so, because I could really not find any evidence of an active anti-Jewish policy, either by the Teutonic Order or by the town councils. But still, the Prussian towns were obviously not places of large and stable Jewish communities. Why? I have actually no idea. Maybe the towns were just not interesting enough, or they weren't urban enough, or the documentation, and this is my best guess, I think, of the urban administration worked a bit differently than in the towns where we have like a long, stable, written tradition of urban administration, and where it's really written who was living where and who was selling what. And definitely the political situation and goals of the Teutonic Order during the 14th and 15th century, that is, first Christianization and colonization of the pagan Prussians, and then the struggle with Poland and Lithuania, these goals were not aimed at regulating Jewish settlement. Other conflicts were here so prominent and so consuming that maybe small, peacefully cohabitating groups of Jews simply left no traces in the sources of medieval Prussia. So the sources do prove a certain familiarity with Jews of the Christian population, and they prove various Jewish-Christian contacts throughout the centuries. And thus, I would assume that Prussia was an area of relatively peaceful, undebated, and undocumented coexistence of the Christian majority and a very small Jewish minority. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Judith Kalik from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She is teaching East European history at the university and published two books, one about the Polish nobility and the other one about the Jewish autonomy in 18th century Crown Poland. And a number of articles in history of Eastern Europe, Jewry, and early modern ages. She's going to talk about the origins of East European Jewry in the light of Micro-toponyms and about the iconography. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this attention. I'm delighted to be here. I'll try to see something on my text. Okay. There is little consensus among scholars about the origins of East European Jews. Do you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah. It is still not clear what was the decisive factor in formation of the East European Jewry. Were these the so-called Romaniot, Greek-speaking, Canaanite Slavic-speaking, or Ashkenazi German-speaking Jews? And what was the origin of all these groups? In respect of the Canaanite Jews, for instance, view ranged from the outright denial of their very existence, Tereset of Murat, to the claim that they were the ultimate ancestors of the majority of modern Ashkenazi Jews, Shepard. Their original homeland is supposed to be either Kievan Russia, or Bulgaria, or Western Slavic lands, such as Bohemia or Lusatia, and their ethnic origin is traced to either Romaniot Jews, or Northern Pontic area, or Khazarian Turkic proselytes, or Sorbian-speaking Jews also, as Wexler, from Tel Aviv University, has proposed. Even the application of the geographical term Rus in Hebrew sources is uncertain, whether it refers to Kievan state or to the so-called Rusaria, or Danube on the borders of Bavaria, Austria, Bohemia, and Moravia, as Nazarenko has proposed. Ashkenazi Jews in Eastern Europe is not less problematic, and it is usually discussed in the connection of the origins of Yiddish language. The problem is that classic early medieval Ashkenazi Jewry was comprised of the Jewish communities in Rhineland and North France, but the Yiddish language spoken by the vast majority of the East European Jews is based on the South German, Swabian, Bavarian dialects. The linguistic research, therefore, has concentrated on the search for supposed substrat of this dialect, which could reveal the origin of the South German cluster of Jewish population, which later on migrated to Eastern Europe. The hypothesis of mass proselytism in 6th century Swabian lands on the background of an uneasy choice between Gothic, Arian, and Frank Catholic forms of Christianity was also cautiously advanced by Alice Faber. The direction of migration from east to west, or from west to east, the relative contribution of the eastern, the so-called Canaanite, Slavic-speaking Jews, and western Ashkenazi, German-speaking Jews, components of population are hotly disputed. And the emphasis on the demographic growth of population already on Polish soil was also promoted by Shaul Stamper. Chronology of main stages of the Jewish penetration into Eastern Europe, as well as the geography of their settlement there, also remain problematic. The development of the Jewish internal organization and the forms of their communal structures are still far poorly understood. Without pretending to solve all these heavy problems, I propose to encounter it on the basis of two previously underused groups of evidence: Jewish micro-toponyms in East European cities in the 13th and 14th centuries, and iconography of the Polish bracteates with Hebrew legends minted in the 12th, 13th centuries. Before proceeding in the examination of the evidence itself, let us clarify its historical setting and context. Three distinct stages of the Jewish presence in Poland can be apprehended on the basis of written evidence. Before the First Crusade, between the First Crusade and the Mongol invasion in 1241, and after the Mongol invasion. The earliest Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin sources on the Jewish presence in Poland refer to the itinerant Jewish merchants passing through Slavic lands, including Poland, whom a 9th century Arabic author Ibn Khordadbeh calls Ar-Radania. Latin chronicle of Gall-Anonim confirms this their presence in Poland in 880 and in 886 during the reign of Queen Judith, wife of Vladislav I Hermit, as well as their involvement in the slave trade. These merchants passed through Poland on their way from France to China. One of these merchants was Ibrahim ibn Yaqub, the 10th century Spanish Jew who left the earliest description of Poland under its first king, Mieszko I. These were not permanent settlers, however, and with the beginning of the permanent Jewish settlement in Poland in the late 11th century, they gradually disappeared from the sources, being mentioned for the last time in 1226 in the custom regulations of for passing through Olesno and Siewierz in Silesia. The Jewish migration from Bohemia to Poland, which marked the beginning of the permanent Jewish settlement in this country, is described in dramatic form in the Czech Chronicle of Cosmos of Prague, who dates it to 1098, when Bohemian Jews forcefully converted to Christianity by the Crusaders, passing through Bohemia, fled to Poland and Hungary. It is difficult to say to what extent this passage should be taken at face value, though it was written by a contemporary. In practice, the Jews began to appear in documents as permanent dwellers only in the late 12th, early 13th century Silesia. These are, surprisingly enough, farmers living in at least 3 Silesian villages, Małytyniec, Sokolnik, both near Wrocław, and Bytom near Katowice. The first 2 villages are said to belong to the Jews, whatever it means, while the Jewish inhabitants of Bytom actually tilled the castle lands. The very existence of the Jewish farmers is well attested in Western Europe in the early Middle Ages, but mostly in southeastern France rather than in Germany, as Toch had shown. Since the very notion of village has not yet stabilized in the 12th century, it is possible that the Jewish owner of Silesian villages was simply the first settlers of several farmsteads, which was not unique Silesian pattern of behavior. Podiva, a Jewish founder of the village Slivnice in Moravia in 11th century, is also mentioned in Cosmos Chronicle. The only Silesian Jews mentioned outside of this group of documents in pre-Mongol age are Rabbi David, son of Sar Shalom, whose gravestone from 1204 was found in Wrocław, the monks nicknamed Jew Judeus in 2 monasteries in Wrocław and Henryków, and the above-mentioned Jewish merchants passing through Olesno and Siewierz. Outside Silesia, Jews are attested very poorly before the Mongol invasion. These are the reference to some Jew injured in Krakow in 1173, mentioned in Kadłubek's chronicle, an urban micro-toponym Jewish well, Puteum Judeorum, attested at Płock in 1237, and the Hebrew legends on Polish bracteates from the late 12th, early 13th century, minted in Gniezno, Kalisz, Inowrocław, and Kraków, which testify about the presence of Jewish mint masters in these places. An early reference to a Jewish place name in Mazovia, Płock, is an isolated case, and no Jewish presence in this region is attested until the 15th century. The only evidence for the Jewish well otherwise is found in Cologne in 1270. Thus, the Jewish well of Płock could be the only direct evidence for the connection of the Rhineland Jews with Eastern Europe, which is very important in the face of the theory about the Rhenish origin of the East European Jews proposed by Weinrich in 1980. If this well served as an open-air mikveh, this could be also the only indirect evidence for the existence of an urban Jewish community in the pre-Mongol period. The activity of the Jewish mint masters in Poland was a result of the so-called renewal of the coinage, renovatio monetae, in the 12th century Poland, Hungary, and Bohemia. The earliest piast coins of the 10th century bore Latin legends. But in the 11th century, the coinage disappeared from about a century in Eastern Europe, when this region returned to the bullion silver exchange. The coinage reappeared in the 12th century in the form of the so-called bracteates, single-sided coins, adapted from the contemporary Saxony and Thuringia, where they appeared from 1130. In Poland, these bracteates coined by the Dukes of Great Poland, Kujawy and Kraków, bore Hebrew legends, which means that their minting was leased to the Jewish mint masters. Hebrew legends of bracteates of Boleslav, Duke of Kujawy, 1186 and 1195, are in fact the only evidence of the Jewish presence in Wrocław before the 15th century. Let us look more closely into iconography of these bracteates in order to find whether this evidence can contribute anything for the possible origin of these Jews. Many images on them contain some clearly Jewish motifs. First of all, the so-called Jewish hat, which frequently appears on bracteates of Mieszko III the Elder, Stary, Duke of Great Poland in 1181 and 1202, and Przemysl II, the Duke of Great Poland in 1279, 1296. I'll try to show. Okay. I'm sorry for the poor quality of these pictures, but there is no better. I took it from Gumowski, from those who know the source. Here you see the typical Jewish hat. This triangle hat is first mentioned as the Jewish headdress in the book of Or Zarua, written by Rabbi Yitzchak ben Moshe of the early 13th century. Later in the century, it is mentioned in the resolutions of the First Provincial Polish Synod of Wrocław in 1267 and in the South German Law Code Schwabenspiegel in 1275 as an obligatory Jewish headdress. All these references point towards South Germany as the original place of this particular headdress, confirming the Swabian Bavarian origin of Great Poland's Jews and contradicting the possible Rhineland connection of the contemporary Mazovian Jews. Secondly, numerous bracteates of Mieszko III bear clear iconographic reference to the Jewish priestly functions, such as the priestly blessing, Nesiat Kapayim. I hope you can see it. You see, I chose only few, but there are many of them. All of them have the Hebrew word bracha, and you can see the Nesiat Kapayim more or less clearly and in them. which probably means that the Jewish mint masters in Great Poland were of priestly origin. This evidence, combined with the above-mentioned Jewish hat, shows that the Great Poland Jews of South German, South German origin could not be Jewish proselytes, since no priests, Kohanim, are usually found among them. The other interesting images which appear in Hebrew brackets that I would like to show you, though they are not contribute any decisive evidence for our discussion, are pictures of a Jew blowing a horn, shofar, and holding Tarnegol Kaparot on brackets of Mieszko the Younger, Duke of Kalik in 1186, 1193. Sorry. Are they? Oh. Here. Here are those three. And an image of plowing peasant on brackets of Mieszko III. The last image possibly refers either to the agricultural abundance of Polish soil or maybe to the Jewish farmers of the 12th century Poland. Here it is. You see?
From where are they? This plakates?
Hmm?
From which town they are?
From near Wrocław. They were found in Wrocław. Some from Krakow.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the inscription?
יוסף, אני חושבת שזה תרועה, מה שכתוב פה it should be תרועה, maybe, because they write this way, it's not, you know. And תוקע, maybe, although it's like mem, yes, but it's probably תוקע. Yeah. They write very poorly in Hebrew, but yes, no, we have many mistakes like that in those coins. Okay, don't need it anymore. The rural Jews did not disappear after the Mongol invasion. They are mentioned. Can I have a light because I don't see my text? I have problems here. Thank you. The rural Jews did not disappear after the Mongol invasion. They are mentioned for the last time in 1301 in a village of Grzegorów near Szczelin in Lower Silesia. And the Jewish mint masters continued to issue bracteates with Hebrew legends still under the rule of Przemysl II, 1276-1296, Duke of Great Poland. However, the character of the Jewish settlement in Poland of the post-Mongol age was entirely different. The impact of the Mongol invasion on the Jews is well known in the Middle East, where it caused a destruction of the ancient Jewish center in Iraq. In Poland, however, Mongol invasion had a rather opposite effect. The destruction caused a need for rapid recovery, which attracted a new wave of settlers in the region. The Slavic cities of Krakow and Wrocław, as well as many other towns of Little Poland and Silesia, were destroyed by the Mongols in 1231. Wrocław was refounded already in the following year, and Krakow in 1257. But this time, they were settled mainly by Germans coming from Bavaria, Saxony, and Bohemia as part of the so-called Drang nach Osten, initiated by the Magdeburg Charter. Jews were an integral part of this migration movement. These were completely different kinds of Jews in comparison to the previous period. Their occupation became overwhelmingly the money lending. This is reflected well in the earliest privileges granted to the Jews of Great Poland and Silesia, which preoccupied predominantly with borrowing money from the Jews against pledges. Jewish occupations other than money lending, which are mentioned in the documents from the post-Mongol age, are few, and they are mainly butchers and weavers. Jews also continued to list state monopolies, which shows some degree of continuity from the previous period. But now, these were the royal salt mines, not the minting. The Jewish merchants are practically unattested in the post-Mongol age, with the sole but significant exception, of the Jewish involvement in the pepper trade with the East in Red Ruthenia. Jews of this third wave of migration settled throughout Silesia, Great Poland, Little Poland, Lusatia and Pomerania, but they reached Red Ruthenia much later, only after the incorporation of this region in the Polish crown in 1340. In Red Ruthenia, these Ashkenazi Jews met the so-called Canaanite, Slavic-speaking Jews, attested there much earlier, already in the 11th and 12th century. This was also much more mass movement of people than previously. During this period of 1231-1388, the Jewish presence is attested in Little Poland, Great Poland, Pomerania, Lusatia, and in Red Ruthenia. And now I'll show you a map. Here it is. It's a very poor quality because I did it myself, and but there is no other maps like this that shows all the Jewish migration. Okay. Okay. Especially important in the references to the Jewish communities especially important is that references to the Jewish communities began to appear from the first time during this period. Universitatea Judeorum in Kalik in 1287, Jewish Street, Judengasse in Krakow in 1304, Jewish Quarter, Vicus Judeorum in Poznan in 1313, and in Krakow in 1347. Jewish town, Civitas Judeorum, in Legnica in 1317, Jewish street, Palatea Judeorum, in Nimesov in 1321, and in Lvov in 1383. The other Krakowian Jewish micro-toponyms include a Jewish cemetery, first mentioned in 1311, der Judenkirchhof, a Jewish bath, mikveh, which is first mentioned in 1358, Balneum Judeorum, and the Jewish gate, Valva Porta Judeorum, first mentioned in 1366. The Jewish gate of Krakow deserves a special attention. Outside Krakow, Outside Krakow, the urban micro-toponym Jewish gate is attested also in several places in Eastern Europe, in Lublin in Poland, in Brno in Moravia, and in Kiev. The Kievan toponym is the oldest. The Jewish gate of Kiev, Zhidovsky Varota, is mentioned already in the 12th century Russian primary chronicle. This name most probably reached Kiev under the influence of Byzantine model, since at Constantinople there was also a Jewish gate in Porta Hebraica in Latin, and yet another city gate in Kiev was named after the Constantinople example, the Goldin Gate, Zoloty Varota at Kiev and Porta Aurea at Constantinople. Since the Jewish gate are attested outside Eastern Europe only in Sicily, Porta Giudaica in Palermo and Apulea Porta Liebrei, where the Byzantine influence was very conceivable, it is possible that the ultimate source of the East European toponym could be also traced to Constantinople. If this is the case, this toponym could reach Moravia and Poland, most probably not directly from Byzantium, but via Kiev, which would provide us with the only trace of the influence of the evasive Canaanite Jews in these countries. To sum up our discussion, we may recall that some connection with the Rhineland is present through the Mazovian micro-toponym of Jewish wealth. The South German origin of Great Polish Jews can be apprehended through the Jewish hat, on Hebrew bracteates from the region. The predominantly agricultural character of the second wave of Jewish settlement in Poland does not exclude mass proselytism in the origin homeland somewhere in South Germany. But the possible priestly origin of the Jewish mint masters in Great Poland does not support this theory. Though the Canaanite Jews are attested directly only in the eastern margin of Poland, Volhynia and Red Ruthenia, their influence further west can be traced through the Krakowian micro-toponym of Jewish Gate, with its Kiev and Constantinople connection. No support for either Khazarian or Sorbian theories on the origin of the Polish Jews can be found in our evidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From Prussia to early Poland and now to Romania. Our next speaker, Dr. Felicia Waldmann from the University of Bucharest. She is also the head of the Goldin Diaspora Research in Bucharest, our colleague. She is an associate professor of Jewish studies and in the University of Bucharest. She coordinates the department center of the Hebrew studies as well. I must say that her PhD is in Jewish mysticism with Professor Moshe Idel, and she is practicing in the Holocaust education in Romania and the Jewish Romanian heritage. Her last two recent published books are Romania, Israel, France, Jewish Trails, and People and Places of Sephardi Bucharest. So she's going to talk today about the Jews of Bucharest, a microcosmos of urban history.
So, I'm going to show you the book and you can circulate it while I speak. This is the first book on Jewish Bucharest that was written by myself and a colleague of mine. We were very surprised to discover that there was no book on Jewish Bucharest. There were articles and sources and there is information available, but nobody ever thought of writing a book on Jewish Bucharest only. So we did this in 2011, and some of the information I'm going to present now comes from the book. So I'm going to allow you to see the book while I speak. Unfortunately, I don't have so many copies, so I will ask you to circulate that one. Okay, so. How do you do that?
Do you need help?
Yes. How do you put it on? Like only one. Thank you. Okay, so actually the title I was thinking of was Jewish Neighborhoods in Medieval and Early Modern Bucharest, and it's really very simple. There were no Jewish neighborhoods in medieval and early modern Bucharest. It's true that there were many, mainly Sephardic Jews, of course, in the beginning, in the main commercial areas of Bucharest, but we do not have Jewish neighborhoods as such. Moreover, we have another problem. We do not have maps and images of medieval and early modern Bucharest, so even that is an exercise in imagination that we have to take. And I'm going to show you. Yeah, this is the first map of Bucharest that we have. As you can see, it doesn't say much. This is 70-70, and you have an idea about the way streets were organized and houses were placed, but there is no name of the street, no indication of the houses, so it's very hard to realize what exactly is there. However, what you can see is the churches, the main churches of the city. Actually, the city was built around churches, and the neighborhoods of Bucharest, until very late, until the 19th century, the neighborhoods of Bucharest are based on the churches. Now, what was happening was that the prince of the land was usually using the local noblemen, the boyars, for various issues, and in exchange for their services, they would give them a piece of land. Now, the first thing the boyars would build on the piece of land they acquired from the ruler was a church, and the church usually bore the name of the local boyar. So that is actually how we get the names of the neighborhoods in Bucharest. The neighborhoods are called from the name of the boyar who built the church around which the neighborhood started developing. So as you can see here, we have churches around which there are streets and there are neighborhoods. And this is where Jews also settled, in the neighborhoods that were already created around the churches. Now, what we know is the first attestation of a Jewish presence in Bucharest comes from 1550. There's a responsa by Samuel de Medina, who was the rabbi of Salonika, and who wrote a responsa in regards to a Jew killed, a Jewish merchant killed around Bucharest. We have another responsa from 1559 from Rabbi sorry about that, Joseph Caro, who was at the time rabbi of Nicopole, and he gave response in regard to another Jew who was killed around Bucharest while trying to collect some debts. What is interesting is that in both responsas we have the same names of Jews in Bucharest, which means there was a stable presence. At least 10 years apart, we had the same Jews living in Bucharest and giving testimony for a responsa, which means these Jews were settled. However, we do not have any other proof of their settlement, and the first document that we actually have about Jewish business, a Jewish presence in Bucharest, comes from 1678. And the document says that boyar, a local boyar, Gheorghe Grigore Cantacuzino, gave the Jew Isaac and his wife Soria, which is actually Sarah, a piece of barren land on the street of Prince Sherban's Inn to build shops and houses on for a rent of $6 per year. Isaac and his descendants may keep the place as long as they shall pay the rent. Contrary to what it may seem, the barren land reference, actually this was the most fashionable part of the city. I'm going to show you quickly a few other maps that we have available from Bucharest, which are not much clearer than the first one. However, this for instance from 1781, it was drawn by Sulzer. This is actually the first where we have some captions. So we have some indication of the churches, of the main houses, the main boyars of the city and their properties. So we have some indication of how the town was organized at the time. And we have the names of the neighborhoods, as I said, around the churches. This is actually very nice, and although it says 1847, 1854, it's actually done very recently by someone, based on the information we have about the city at the time, in an attempt to recreate the image of the city as we don't have it from sources. This is actually the first good map of Bucharest that we have, the so-called Borotsin plan of 1853, where you have again the churches, the black areas are the churches, but you also have the names of the street, the names of the neighborhoods, the names of the houses, of the main houses, and so on. So this is actually one of the first sources where you have, as you can see on the right, the names of the churches, and that gives you the names of the neighborhoods. So this is how we know where Jews were located, because we have documents about the Jewish presence, but we don't have any image. So this is how we can locate the presence of the Jews in the city. Now, for a very long time, the presence of the Jews in the city was actually in the main, really in the main street, not just the main commercial area, but the main street of Bucharest, which was from the very beginning of the city, the so-called Lipscan Street. Lipscan actually comes from Leipzig. Leipzig was the place where most merchants came from at the time. And in a Romanian pronunciation, this was called Lipska, and the merchants from Lipska were called Lipscan. And this street was where they were bringing their merchandise and selling it. So the name remained until today. The street is still called Lipscan until today. And this is what we call the kilometer zero of Bucharest. And this is where the Jews settled from the very beginning. Because most of them were merchants, they did not have enough money in the beginning at least to have separate houses. So we have specific type of houses, Jewish houses, where we have at the front the store and at the back the dwelling, or on the ground floor the store and on the upper floor the dwelling. And these dwellings still exist on this street, and we have some Jewish houses on this street until today. Now this is a detail of that map, which shows you that indeed you can identify streets and you can identify churches and neighborhoods and names of main houses, most important houses of the richest people. This is actually the best plan we have, 1871, the so-called Papazoglu plan, which is actually, here you don't realize, but it actually has very good details. So from the details of this, you can see, and I will show you better details a little later, here you can see the Jewish buildings as well. For instance, you have here Hevra, here this is a Hevra, and then here on this side, this is a Hevra. So these are synagogues which are actually mentioned on the map, so that's how we know exactly where the synagogues were. As you can imagine, at the time there were no street names with numbers, so you have to identify the descriptions from these images, since we do not really have pictures. This is again a detail which shows you how well you can identify the places in 1871. And again a detail which shows you churches, synagogues, community buildings. So on these kind of maps you have almost everything. As I said, we don't have pictures. These are the only pictures we have from early Bucharest. Actually, Bucharest was set up in 1456, so this is very late. In the early 18th century are the first images that we have from Bucharest. They are not very clear, as you can see, so it's very hard to identify anything on the pictures themselves. This is again 1789, and as you can see, it's really not very descriptive. You don't find much on this picture. Of course, they are drawings, not real pictures, but the point is they are not very clear in terms of being able to identify places in Bucharest. However, the first good pictures we have from Bucharest are from mid-19th century. They were made by a photographer called Angerer. And this is, for instance, the main street of the city, the main area of the city, 1856. You can see many churches there behind. There's no synagogue or anything in this area visible, but at least you can see how the city looked like at the time. This is another drawing actually, but also it gives you an idea about how the city was organized. There was one hilly side where is until today, the Metropolitan Church, and there are some other churches which of course always come up as the highest buildings. That's another thing I should mention. The rule of the land was that no building was supposed to be higher than a church, and in the beginning churches were very small, and therefore synagogues had to be even smaller. Or anyway, they had to be built, which was the case in many places, underground, so that they are not taller than the church. This is the first so-called real map that we have from Bucharest from 1900. It's actually a German map, but it does give you an idea about everything that was in the city at the time. So, what we know about the Jewish presence, as I said, before the 19th century, is that, okay, this is a detail because I mentioned that the place where the first document tells us that there was a Jewish business is in the center of Bucharest on Boiar Grigore Cantacuzino's land in the street of Prince Șerban's Inn. Prince Șerban Inn is this one, which is, of course, doesn't exist any longer, but the place itself exists. So this was the very center of the city where the Jews obtained leased land. They couldn't buy land, but they could lease land, and they could have shops and also houses to live in. This is how the inn looked like in 1880. This is the Șerban Vodă Inn. Inside, and this is outside. There are several pictures from this inn, which was the most important for a very long time. It was demolished very late, and it was until the Second World War the main trading area of Bucharest. And as I said, I am going to show you this detail of the Papazoglu map, because this is where you can see, this is Halfon's house. This was one of the main bankers of Bucharest, the Jewish bankers, of course. This is a synagogue, Havra. This is Hillel's house, again, one of the main bankers of Bucharest. And this is the quarter where Jignica, it's actually a mistaken name. It comes from the warehouse of the prince. The name is given to the warehouse of the prince, and that's where the warehouse of the prince was always seated. And it's in that area that the first settled Jews are mentioned. So we know there was a synagogue there from the very beginning, from probably the 17th century, although we don't have much information about it. But we know that there was a synagogue there, and that was the first place where Jews were allowed to settle. But they settled, as I said, in the various neighborhoods around the area. They did not settle in one neighborhood, and there were never two Jewish houses, one near the other, as you can see here. Okay, so we know that the best documents, the most relevant document about Jewish presence, come from the end of the 17th century, when Constantin Brancovan was the ruler of Wallachia, and when actually he allowed the Jews to organize themselves in a guild. It was not a community, it was a guild supposedly based on crafts and trades, but actually it was more like a community. They were allowed to organize themselves, and this was the first organized community, organized Jewish presence that we have in Bucharest. After Brancovan was deposed, actually, the following ruler, who had an important role in his predecessor's deposition, to show his goodwill to the people and to cover what he did against his predecessor, he gave a lot of privileges to the church and to the people. He waived some taxations, and among other things, he demolished the church, the synagogue, the Jewish synagogue, despite the fact that it was situated in a remote place as opposed to the princely court, and gave strict orders that the Jews no longer be allowed to gather for prayers. We do not know when the synagogue had been built, but we know that at the time, near it there was a Hevra Kadisha and an alms box, and the Jewish guild was headed at the time by Mordechai ben Yehuda, whose tombstone from 1716 was for a long time the oldest to be preserved in the city's Jewish cemeteries. The tombstone was luckily documented by Frederic Dame in his book Bucharest in 1906, because it was then destroyed during the desecration and closure of the Sevastopol cemetery by the legionary movement in 1941. And this is the tombstone. Luckily, we still have a picture of it. The tombstone doesn't exist anymore. The cemetery doesn't exist anymore. The cemetery was in the middle of the city because it was from the very beginning. Despite these shortcomings, Jewish immigration to the Romanian Principalities visibly increased in the 18th century, organized in guilds, as I said, from the time of Brancovan's rule. The Jews enjoyed the status of internal autonomy, regulated by charters and privileges, which gave them the right to settle in exchange for various dues to the reign. We cannot therefore speak of a privileged regime granted to Jewish trade, but rather of an acknowledgement of their profitability for the treasury's incomes. Thus, we have a 1724 Bucharest sale deed mentioning the house of Sora the Jewess as a reference point in the Greek church quarter on the street leading to the princely court. And then we have another document issued by the St. George Church in 1728, indicating that one of the church's shops had been previously kept by Leon the Jew. And here is the Greek church and inn in 1837. The inn is on the left. So this is where they were allowed to have shops. As I said, the churches were the owners. They were lending the land for shops and houses, and Jews were allowed, so they were not exempt from this. They were allowed to be among the beneficiaries of these church leases. Then, In 1730 is the first attestation of a Jewish community proper, that is a community called community and organized as a community. And this was obtained by two Ottoman Jews, Daniel de Fonseca and Mentesh Bali, who convinced the prince at the time, Nicolae Mavrocordat, to grant the Jews this status, this right to have a proper organization for all their members, not just a professional guild, as was the case before. We know that in 1743, for instance, Joseph the glassblower, son of Daniel the Jew, and his wife Esther, rented from another boyar, Lambrino, and his wife, Lady Balasha, a piece of land near the lower gate of the princely court for an $8 annual rent to build a house on. The successful construction of the house is confirmed by a document issued later by the next ruler, whereby he bestowed the Metropolitan of Wallachia several princely pieces of land, together with the shops on them, among which is mentioned the house of Joseph the Jewish glassblower, whose house lays on the land of Lady Balasha's property. And this is the place. This is Cala Moșilor, as it was called later in 1900. So this is where he was given the piece of land. We don't have, unfortunately, images from the time he was given the piece of land, but this is how it looked in 1900. A document from 1760 informs us that at the time there were two synagogues in the so-called Mahalaua Popescului, which in Romanian Mahala comes from Turkish, and it's actually neighborhood. It's not actually exactly like in Turkish. Mahalle, in Romanian Mahala is a neighborhood. This was the neighborhood where the first mention was made, and then the next one is the street that I was telling you about, Lipscan Street. So this is the oldest street of Bucharest. The street that goes forward is the oldest street of Bucharest from the very beginning of the city. This was the main street, the main commercial street. And here actually it's a market where there are 4 streets that meet, the most important streets of Bucharest. Then what we have later, this is the same square from another angle, and you can see this is where the 2 streets on which we have Jewish mentions meet, and this is what it looks today, so you have an idea. So this is where the princely court was, this is the Lipscan Street, this is Calea Moșilor, and this is where the Jignița quarter was, the Hevra, and this is still the Jewish quarter today. This is where the Jewish quarter is today. So until the 19th century, this was the Jewish area of the city, but this was not really a Jewish neighborhood, but was a commercial neighborhood where many Jews used to live, spread out among the local people. This is how another, again, based on a boyar and his church, Brezoianu, this is how another area looked like, where the Jewish presence started developing a little later. This is also the area of that I showed you, that is the heartland of Jewish presence, how it looked in 1900, and where even today there are the still standing synagogues of Bucharest. And this is the main area in 1901. This is, as I mentioned, again, this is the other side of the street, the same Lipscan area. This is the St. George Inn and Church in 1837. Again, this was a mainly Jewish area. And this is from the other side, the same place from the back. This is again the Sherban in 1880, as I mentioned before. And this is another place. This is interesting because unfortunately we don't have a picture of the neighborhood itself. This is just a church. But this is where the first Jewish cemetery was located. The cemetery was closed long ago in the 18th century, so from an early time. And then the stones were moved, and then some of the bones were moved to the Sevastopol cemetery, which was destroyed during the Second World War. But this is important because this was one of the places where the Jewish presence was mentioned from very early. This is where the current Jewish quarter is, that is where we still have a few synagogues still standing. This is what it looked like in 1835. You can see here, these are the Turkish, the Ottoman merchants, and among them there were many Jews, many Ottoman Jews came as merchants to Bucharest. Now, this is the Sephardic synagogue of Bucharest, the so-called Kahal Grande. This was built in 1819 in the area that I showed you, in the heartland of Jewish presence. It was approved by the ruler of the time because there was no church around at the time and there was no problem. But the problem was that in 1941 it was destroyed by the legionary movement and it was never rebuilt because there was no possibility to do that. There was no money and there was no chance under the communist regime to rebuild it. So eventually it disappeared altogether in 1955. So we don't have any reminder of this. Even the street on which the synagogue was disappeared under the communist blocks, so there is absolutely no reminder of this. This is another area, Ox's Well, where we have mentions of a Jewish presence in Bucharest. Again, it's not a neighborhood, just some merchants in the area. This is an Ottoman inn, actually, behind which the Jews wanted to build a synagogue. It's in the same area. Again, I'm talking about one small area of Bucharest. This was in the same area, and behind this, Jews wanted to build a synagogue, and they were not given permission because this was a mainly commercial area, and the answer of the local authorities was that a synagogue would disrupt the commercial activity of the area. This is another place where Jews started living at some point, the Fire Tower of Bucharest, which still exists. And there was a small Jewish neighborhood around the Fire Tower. And we know that because they wanted to build a synagogue and they were allowed. So we have documents asking for permission to build a synagogue there. And they did build it, and I will show you the synagogue. This is a synagogue that no longer exists, but on top of it was built this one, which still exists today. This is today the museum of the Jewish community in Bucharest. And this was the interior. Now it's a museum. It doesn't look like that anymore. And this is the previous synagogue, because the synagogue that still stands today was built on the site of this synagogue, which was demolished because it was already too old and they couldn't repair it. They preferred to build another one altogether. Now, this is another nice drawing of Kahal Grande. Unfortunately, these are the only two images we have of Kahal Grande. The other images, we have two other images of Kahal Grande, which are actually from the destruction in 1941, and the images show actually that the synagogue destroyed. But the synagogue in its full splendor, we don't have any images of, except these two images, the drawing and the other picture. This is one other so-called neighborhood in which Jews lived before 1847. As you can see, everything is wood, and that is why in 1847 there was a big fire which destroyed almost half of the city, because everything was built in wood. And this is the Kahal Chicu, the second and last Sephardic synagogue of Bucharest. There were only two altogether, and this one was destroyed by the communists in 1987. So it survived until very late. Unfortunately, the communists got time to destroy it. So today there is absolutely nothing left of Sephardic Bucharest. And this is the great synagogue, which is still standing today. This is the Holocaust Museum, and it's in the same area. So this is the area where the Jews started and where the Jews end. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you come here and answer some? We have time for some question and answers. Yes.
Thank you very much, first of all, for these wonderful presentations. I want to, yes, once again, thank you very much for your wonderful presentations. I want to take now the possibility or the chance to say a comment to the wonderful presentation of Judith Kalik, and wanted to connect it together to the presentation of Cordelia, because I think these two presentations belong together. First of all, I want to thank you, Judith, Kalik, because you gave me a lot of answers to theories or ideas that I had at least a few years ago, and I meant the whole idea of what I call and others will call sometimes the Ashkenazization, the Ashkenization of Poland, or at least also of the whole idea. What you showed me, especially in your Silesia case, how this Ashkenization or this Jewish Ashkenazi settlement and the general German settlement are belonging together. And this was, so to say, how interconnected they are. And I mean, we all know this article of Tashma about medieval Jewish Poland before this Ashkenazi influence, but this is another subject. But here, and thank you again, but here the questions I have for Cordelia also starting for me, because we have here the same phenomena, but the Jews are, at least according to the old narrative, are missing. And when I remember Germania Judaica 1, Germania Judaica 2, at least I learned it like that, there are no Jews in northern Germany. Or at least at the coastline. There are no Jews in Hamburg, there are no Jews in Rostock, and there are no Jews in Stettin, and so on. And therefore, it was clear for me that there are also no Jews in Danzig, and in Königsberg, and in Riga, and in Reval. And I hope from your presentation, maybe to change my picture completely. And maybe it didn't work so much, and I very much liked your presentation, but here a little bit a critique as well. Because it's not clear for me what you're asking. Because in the presentation, what you gave to us is about anti-Jewish, and took it, also your last statement is, so to say, a sikum, it's a conclusion to the whole idea. You spoke more about anti-Jewish sentiments. If there is a possibility that Jews are there, for me, as a settlement historian, this is not enough, or at least this is not my question. Because when you're asking about if Jews are there, then I want you to see, you know, the facts. I know it from Western German sources. If these charges of the cities, they're always there against Jews, or the right to settle down Jews, it means nothing. At least for the categories I like to emphasize that. When we know about Jews, it's fine, but this is not enough. And I hope very much, maybe on another opportunity, also the small stuff. If I remember the right Königsberg and the small Jews or these Jews who are living there, I want to hear more. And therefore, the question is for me not only why there are no Jews in Prussia, but the big question still for me is there why there are no Jews at the Baltic Sea, why there are no Jews in Scandinavia. And maybe you will say there are, so please show us. And this is what I really much would appreciate, and I hope that you don't understand this critique too wrong. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to say something? Thank you very much. As much as I would like to give you some solid evidence of actually existing Jews in the medieval Prussian towns, I cannot really do that. It is my argument is very much an argument out of absence. What I really can prove is that there was no active anti-Jewish policy, neither from the side of the Teutonic Order nor from the side of the towns. There were no pogroms. And then there are things like there's the Judengasse, there are occasional, the surname Jude, Jode, which I'm not quite sure what to make of. There's evidence of traveling merchants who were Jews from the surrounding areas, and I've given you not everything, but most of the things I could give you. There is not more solid evidence, and this is, as I try to say. Of course, you can, or it's not a good topic for Germania Judaica.
Why not? I mean, this is part of Germania Judaica in a broader sense.
Yeah, but because I mean, I've been going through the town archives and through the documentation pretty thoroughly, and except for the the regulations that I found and the people's names, there's really not much to go after. But it is also true that, for example, these suburbs and Freiheiten that I mentioned, they are not documented at all. So I cannot do more for you. I'm sorry.
Can I comment?
Of course.
Yes. Maybe you should consider that Gdansk, which you prefer to call Danzig, maybe is situated on the Lubeck law, which prohibited Jews, unlike Magdeburg law, residing in the city. So the very essence of the Lubeck law is has all Hanseatic cities has it, you know. So it prohibits the Jews to settle in the town. And in these suburbs of Gdańsk, there were many Jews attested in the early modern period, living under the Bishop of Turn. Yes, so when we, of course, and then Gdańsk already had the non-tolerantis Judaeis, so not.
Yeah, I mean that is specific because it switches landlords so often, and one of the questions that I started from was that from the early modern area we also have evidence of expulsions. 1567 or so, the Jews of Memel are expelled, which are never heard of before 1567. So this is where I start from, and I mean I'm not claiming that I found previously unheard of Jewish communities. This is not where I come from. I'm just saying maybe there wasn't such a strict restriction as previous scholarship used to claim.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. All the talks were wonderful on a subject I know so little, so I dare make some mistakes. I just, this is mainly I think for Judith, a call for cautious. Now this comes from Western Europe, other times, other sources, but it might be true also to your sources. It's up to you to see the use of Jewish names and Jewish letters does not signify always the presence of Jews. Jewish toponyms in Western Europe, we have a lot of places where it's either, sometimes it's the road or the gate leading to the Jewish quarter. Sometimes it's where Lombard moneylenders sat, and they called it the Jewish street because moneylenders sat there. Other times, and I know I'm going here against Toch and Gold, but in some cases I could prove it very nicely. Sometimes, it's not always, sometimes it has to do much with medieval toponyms in general, of having very scary names to very faraway places, like the Devil's Passage. And the Jew is sort of a mystical creature, kind of demonic and frightening, and they give names to places, deserted places where nobody sat. And whatever, even if Gob said it was a Jewish farm, I can't buy it. This is about Jewish names. Not always a Jewish name, a toponym addresses a Jewish settlement. This is the first. And Jewish letters is the same thing. Jewish letters, Bede, Beda, the Anglo-Saxon writer copies Hebrew letters. And you know well, way well than I do about these coins later, Ukraine, Eastern coins with Hebrew letters, and when you decipher the Hebrew, it says Jesu Christi in Hebrew with the image of Christ that pilgrimage used. So, and we could find Hebrew letters in omelets, in magical omelets, produced by non-Jews, evidently by non-Jews. So I just heal for cautious that Hebrew names and Hebrew letters don't always attest for Jews, and especially before 1241. We really don't have much sources.
I need the microphone. I can speak. I think all of you. Yes, of course, I'm well aware of that, and especially in Kiev, for example. Like there's of course the Jewish gate, as Felicita Murat had claimed, is just because of the Constantinople gate, the Jewish gate, it may be just nothing, you know. He argues that there were no Jews in Kievan Russia at all, you know? And it's all literary sources and allusions and so on. So
there's an article from the beginning of the 20th century in one of the Review to the Two Jewry about Hebrew toponyms in Greece. Somebody traveled there, I don't remember, and there's Jewish columns and Jewish temples and everything is Jewish. And he goes back in that article to say that something has to do with ancient Jewish settlements or whatever. But he lists there a lot of things around the Mediterranean, North Africa as well, Jewish toponyms.
Yes, yes, I'm aware of the problematic.
Okay, thank you, Professor Schatzmänner. Yeah.
Yeah, Judith. About what Rainer mentioned now about Tashma and the whole idea of East European, the orientation. Judah Hasid, around, I suppose, 1180, 1190, moved from the Rhineland to your city.
Regensburg.
And lived there until 1217. We generally, all of us, work on Sefer Hasidim, which has 2,000 things, even more. But there is more important than Sefer Hasidim and from Judah Hasid. And this is his commentary on the Bible. It was published by a Swiss rabbi, Lange, and the rabbinate of Palestine refused the book. He had to, I suppose, burn the book and published it again for reasons that had to do with the ideology of the book. One of the greatest scandals of the 20th century in Jewish studies. However, it is a discussion between Judah Hasid and his son, and it is historical. The son reports, I talked with my father said this, I answered this way, and the like. While Sefer Hasidim is not historical, this book, this tiny book, is very much historical and very important. And now I come to the point. Around, I would say, what, 1200, the son says, students of my father told me ta, 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 ta. And he gives us what the student told him in biblical things. At least one of them is from Russia, 1200, at least one, and several, at least two, are from Poland. Imagine they are long enough in Russia and in Poland that they decide to move to Regensburg to study there. And notice, they don't go to the yeshiva of Regensburg for some reason. I could give you theories, but nevertheless. And they go to study with the Chacham Judah Hasid, who was not a rabbi and was not a head of the academy. But it is, in my opinion, a proof that Jews did exist in Poland and in Russia, or Ukraine probably, years before 1200. I thought, you know about it, but I thought that all our friends know.
Yes, in Kiev and Russia, of course, from the 10th century already. You know, I really disagree with this, that there were no Jews, you know, this theory, because even the letter of the found in the Cairo Gniza, you know, from the 10th century even if it weren't sent from Kiev, but because it's Amudim Anu Lachem Kahal Kiev and not but sent from Bulgaria or something. But it was sent to Kiev then, and there was a community and so on. So, of course, in these regions, Jews were earlier tested. I talked about the Polish crown, not this area today, but and I thank you very much for your comment on this book. I think Alexander Kalik, as I have told you, would be very interested in that because he is dealing with. With East European Jews visiting in England and
Alexander Kalik, he brings all these sources in his article.
Yes.
I should tell you about Kiev just. Professor Gold lectured to me in my seminar about his discovery of the Kiev documents. And as you know, the document here, this is the Gniza document, and it is torn here, and the Kiev is written there. He opened it, and there is a huge hole. And I told him I could write in this hole Constantinopolis. I don't need Kiev, it's too big for Kiev. And he said that this is because of my bad character, which is probably the case. But I see that more and more people in Russia are now realizing that one has to doubt whether it's really Kiev.
It's not.
No, it was doubted before.
Okay.
It's
not. Of course.
It's not.
It's not Kiev?
And I talked to Judith also. There's an apostrophe above the bet, first of all.
Yeah.
Kiev apostrophe. And the reading is very doubtful.
It's really, you could write there New Orleans. So.
Question to Dr. Kalik. You mentioned a Prague Chronicle. That reminds me of 20 years ago, I published about 60 tombstones from Spandau. Important passage from west to east, the confluence of Spree and Havel, the birthplace of Berlin, so to say. And I made a lot of mistakes by publishing these tombstones because of the names of the women.
Yes.
Yeah. The names of the men, more or less perfect Hebrew names. Yonah, Dan, not very frequent in the West, but okay, no problems, no mistakes. But the names of 6 or 7 women, we misread them. Afterwards, we understood that they were all Bohemian. Mlada. I don't remember the other ones. See? We took the Dalet for Reish, etc. Typical.
Yeah. Lebids. I have Lebids in. I didn't bring it here, but I also now deal with tombstones from Wrocław, from Silesia.
Yeah. So
and
how
there
does that
you
fit
have
into
also
your...
in women names you have great problems. Slavic names.
Yep.
I told you Lebed, for example.
There are no Slavonic names in Worms.
And
there is
so
one in
very,
Regensburg.
yes.
So could that be that the women in Spandau came from Czech lands, from Bohemian places? Does that fit somehow with this Prague Chronicle, which I don't know? Sorry.
I don't know. I can say it's hard to say, because you have this name. Maybe women more often adopted the non-Jewish names.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
so
if they are typically from a certain...
And yes, I wonder myself, because this is a typical Bohemian name. Libid is a typical Bohemian. It's not, it's not Polish. It's not. So it's. I wonder myself. I'm now dealing with it because Kulik and I were publishing these documents. We are gathering all. I'm doing Crown Poland. He's doing Kievan Russia, and I must also publish this, coins and tombstones, which is not exactly my specialization. So I really. I don't know. I have great problems with it. Yes.
Thank you. The last
maybe a comment to this discussion here, and also also your publication, not about your publication, but it was a very important thing, this publication, to understand the connection, what I already mentioned, between German Eastern settlement to the east and the whole development and the influence to the Jewish communities. You've been asking if the women may be from Bohemia. I would have sent, you know how many women in the Western called Frummet, Blume, or whatever. What I want to say is, we have here the names of the spoken and still ruling language and culture in Brandenburg and Spandau, which is still not really Brandenburg and still not really Spandau. And we are here in this strong development. We are in this period, in the enter period, when these territories became Germanized, became German territories. And therefore it was no wonder that in this territory, in this Spandau cemetery, we have these Slavic names. And the same case we have in Breslau, and Wrocław in Breslau as well, in Silesia, we have this thing, and this is so fascinating for me. What I call, what you can call Germanization for the Christian popularization, which is happening between 1200 and 1350, at least for Nether Silesia, and you have also at least a phenomena among the Jewish population, even in the German language. And this is the whole thing, and therefore I was so fascinated, and I'm so grateful for your presentation. That's what you're showing with all the sources what you have. And I know the people of Berlin don't like to hear this, but this part of Germany became much more later to Germany than, for example, Saxony or Meissen or whatever. And so the picture fits. The picture fits really together.
Thank you. It is a good point to stop this session, I think. Okay? And I thank you all for a very fascinating session.